On Thanksgiving Day, I arrived unannounced at my daughter's house in Richmond, Virginia, and saw my grandson, Ethan, shivering on the front steps in 10-degree weather, clad only in a thin t-shirt and shorts. Inside, the family sat around a festive dining table, laughing and enjoying turkey in the cozy warmth of their home. Fury surged through me at their neglect, a betrayal that cut deep. I kicked down the front door and spoke 6 words that drained the color from their faces. "You left him out to freeze." But that was only the beginning of the justice that would reshape their lives forever. My phone buzzed against the dashboard as I sat in my old Ford pickup, idling in my driveway. A text from my neighbor read, "Police at the Thompsons again. Domestic issue. Thinking of you and your family concerns." I stared at those words, my thoughts heavy. The Thompsons, my late wife, Ellen, used to worry about their grandson too, back when she was still with me. Now, it was just me, haunted by a gnawing unease about Sarah's marriage to James. The clock read 1:45 p.m. Time to go. I shifted into reverse and pulled out onto Oakwood Lane in my small town outside Fredericksburg. Snow had started falling an hour earlier, thick flakes sticking to everything, making the roads treacherous. The radio crackled with weather warnings as I merged onto Interstate 95 south toward Richmond. About an hour's drive away, a classic rock station played a Rolling Stones song, its heavy rhythm matching my mood. On the passenger seat sat 2 gift bags. One held a new baseball mitt for Ethan, genuine leather, more expensive than I'd planned to spend. The other contained graphic novels, superhero stories he'd loved since he was 10 years old. Now 19, he might think he was too old for them. But I remembered being 19. You're never too old for heroes. Family is all we have left, Ellen used to say when I grumbled about holiday visits. She was right then, and her words rang true now, echoing in my memory. Losing her 8 months ago made every family gathering feel precious, fragile, like a cracked glass about to shatter. The windshield wipers struggled against the mounting snow. Other cars crawled along at half the speed limit, their hazard lights blinking like nervous fireflies in the gray afternoon. I gripped the steering wheel with both hands, maintaining a steady 35 miles per hour. No point arriving at all if I ended up in a ditch. Exit signs counted down the miles to Richmond. I tried calling Sarah's house, hoping to soften the surprise of my unannounced visit. The phone rang 5 times before hitting voicemail. Strange. Someone was always home on Thanksgiving afternoon. A gas station appeared through the snowy haze, its fluorescent lights cutting through the gloom like a beacon. I pulled in, filled the tank, and went inside to grab a coffee and a bag of peppermint candies Ethan always liked. The clerk, a young man with tired eyes, shook his head at the weather. "Roads are getting worse by the hour," he said, scanning my items. "You driving far just to Richmond? Family dinner. Be careful out there. Seen 4 accidents today. Back in the truck." I checked the time again, 2:20 p.m. The drive usually took an hour, but today it would be closer to 90 minutes with the snow. I thought about Ethan, probably helping Sarah in the kitchen or watching football with James. He'd grown so much since our fishing trip last summer at Lake Anna. He'd caught his first trout that day, grinning like he'd won the lottery. That's when I noticed the bruise on his arm, a mark that looked too precise, like fingers gripping too hard. When I asked, he mumbled about falling off his skateboard, but the explanation felt wrong. I should have pressed harder, asked more questions. Ellen would have known what to do, her instincts always sharper than mine. The snow kept falling as I took exit 12 toward Sarah's neighborhood. Suburban streets were lined with 2-story houses, each adorned with pumpkins, autumn wreaths, and early Christmas lights twinkling through the white curtain of snow. Warm light spilled from windows, casting golden rectangles on snow-covered lawns. This was supposed to be a good day, a healing day. Ellen would have wanted it that way. Sarah's street came into view, her gray two-story house with black shutters at the end of the block. James's SUV sat in the driveway next to her minivan, smoke curling from the chimney, holiday decorations framing the front porch. Everything looked normal, peaceful, almost perfect. I slowed the truck as I approached, already imagining the surprise on their faces when I knocked. Maybe Ethan would run to hug me, like he did when he was younger. Maybe this Thanksgiving would be the start of healing our family, the way Ellen always dreamed it could be. I pulled into the driveway behind James's SUV, the engine ticking as it cooled in the frigid air. Through the falling snow, I saw holiday lights twinkling around the front door and heard faint music from inside. Something warm and inviting, like a scene from a Norman Rockwell painting brought to life. Then I saw him. Ethan sat on the front steps, hunched over, arms wrapped tightly around his knees. No coat, no hat, just a thin, short-sleeved shirt and jeans already dusted with snow. His shoulders shook, not just from the cold, but from something deeper, something that broke my heart. "Jesus Christ," I muttered. Throwing open the truck door, the wind hit me like a slap, carrying ice crystals that stung my face. In the few seconds it took to reach him, I saw his lips had turned blue, his hands pressed tightly against his body to conserve warmth. "Ethan," I called, breaking into a run across the slippery driveway. "What are you doing out here?" He looked up, and the relief in his eyes nearly shattered me. His face was pale, almost gray, with red patches on his cheeks where the cold had bitten deepest. "Grandpa," he whispered, his teeth chattering so hard he could barely form words. I yanked off my heavy winter coat, wrapping it around his shoulders before he could finish speaking. His body was ice cold, trembling like a leaf in a storm. "What do you mean you can't? Can't what I helped him stand?" Steadying him as his legs nearly buckled. "How long have you been out here? I'm not allowed inside," he said, pulling my coat tighter around himself. I could feel him shaking through the thick fabric. "I'm not allowed in the house." The words hit me like a physical blow. Behind us, through the brightly lit windows, I heard laughter and the sound of a television, the warm glow of a family celebration, while my grandson sat freezing on the front steps like some kind of outcast. "What do you mean, not allowed?" My voice came out sharper than I intended, anger building in my chest like a fire. "This is your home." Ethan flinched at my tone, and I immediately softened it. The last thing he needed was another adult yelling at him. "Please, Grandpa, don't make it worse," he whispered, glancing nervously at the front door. "If James hears you." I looked at the house, really looked at it, the decorations, the warm lights, the sounds of joy. Then I looked at my grandson, blue-lipped and shivering in clothes unfit for 40-degree weather, let alone this near-zero nightmare. "How long?" "Ethan," I kept my voice gentle but firm. "How long have you been out here?" He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Since this morning." This morning I checked my watch, 2:45 p.m. "Son, it's below zero out here. You could get frostbite." I stopped myself before scaring him further. I tried the front door handle. Locked, of course. They'd locked him out of his own home on Thanksgiving Day and left him to freeze while they enjoyed their holiday feast. "We need to get you warm," I said, guiding him toward my truck. "Come on, let's get you in the cab where there's heat." But even as I moved to protect him, my mind was cataloging details the way he flinched when I raised my voice. The bruises I'd noticed during our fishing trip, the careful way he moved, like someone who'd learned to make himself small to avoid harm. This wasn't the first time. This was a pattern. "Ethan," I said as I helped him into the passenger seat and cranked the heater to maximum, "I need you to tell me exactly what happened today." I turned the heat to full blast and wrapped a blanket from my emergency kit around his shoulders. His hands were so numb he couldn't grip anything properly. So I held them between mine, rubbing warmth back into his fingers. "Talk to me, son," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the rage burning inside. "What happened this morning?" He stared down at his hands, still trembling. "I was helping Mom with the turkey. She asked me to check it while she showered." His voice was small, laced with shame. "I forgot to reset the oven timer when I took it out to baste it." "You forgot a timer. The turkey got a bit overcooked on top. Not ruined, just darker than usual." He finally looked at me, fear in his eyes. James came in, saw it, and he just lost it. Lost it how started yelling that I'd ruined the whole holiday. The guests would think Mom couldn't cook, that I was an embarrassment to the family. Ethan pulled the blanket tighter. Then he said I needed to think about my actions and couldn't come back inside until I'd learned some responsibility. "And your mother?" The question came out harder than I meant. Ethan looked away. She tried to say something at first, but James told her to stay out of it. Said it was between him and me. He swallowed hard. She didn't say anything after that. I checked my watch again, 3:00 p.m. "Ethan, what time did this happen?" "Around 10:30 this morning. 5 hours. 5 hours in weather that could kill over a slightly overcooked turkey that probably tasted fine." I took several deep breaths to keep from shouting. "Has this happened before?" The question hung heavy between us. I could see him wrestling with whether to tell the truth, weighing the consequences of honesty against the relief of finally sharing. "Sometimes," he whispered, "when I mess up. Last month, he made me stand in the garage all night because I forgot to mow the lawn. Once, he locked me in the attic for a day because I accidentally spilled soda on his favorite chair." Each word felt like a punch to my gut. I looked at my grandson, this smart, kind boy who'd never hurt a soul, and saw how he held himself, like someone who'd learned that taking up space could be dangerous. "Your mother knows about this. She says James is just trying to teach me discipline, that I need to be more responsible." His voice cracked. "Maybe she's right. Maybe I am just—" "Don't," I said, turning to face him fully. "Don't you dare blame yourself for this. What that man's doing isn't discipline. It's abuse, and it's going to stop today." Ethan's eyes widened with panic. "No, Grandpa, please. If you make a scene, he'll take it out on me later. He always does." I could see the house through the windshield, still glowing warm and inviting, filled with laughter and holiday music. Inside, my daughter was serving dinner to guests while her son sat freezing in my truck, too afraid to ask for basic human decency. "Listen to me," I said, taking his hands again. "You're 19 years old. You don't have to live like this anymore. And I'm not going to let you—" "But where would I go?" he asked. "I don't have money. I can't afford college without 'you'll come home with me tonight,'" I said, the decision solidifying as I spoke. "We'll figure out the rest later." I could see hope and terror warring in his expression. Hope that someone was finally standing up for him. Terror that things might not actually get better. "He won't let me leave," Ethan said quietly. "He'll call the police, say I stole something or you're kidnapping me." I looked at the house again, its warm lights and festive decorations, and felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. Ellen had always been the diplomatic one, smoothing over family conflicts with patience and understanding. But she was gone now, and diplomacy hadn't protected my grandson from 5 hours in near-freezing weather. "Let me worry about James," I said, opening the truck door. "Right now. We're getting your things." I stepped out into the snow, my boots crunching on the accumulating white. Ethan scrambled to follow, still wrapped in my coat. My hands weren't just shaking from the cold anymore. They trembled with a rage that had built slowly, now hitting like a freight train as the full picture came into focus. Why didn't you tell me it was this bad? I asked, studying his face closely. Now that I was really looking, I saw faint bruises along his jawline, partially hidden by shadows and cold reddened skin. I tried to hint, he whispered, pulling my coat tighter. But you always talk to Mom. And she? The memory hit like a slap. Last month, Ethan had called while I was making dinner, his voice small and uncertain. Grandpa, James says I can't eat dinner with them anymore. I have to earn my place at the table. I'd laughed it off, thinking it was teenage drama. I called Sarah the next day, and she brushed it aside with practiced ease. Dad, you're overreacting. It's just normal family discipline. Ethan exaggerates everything. Another memory surfaced. From a summer phone call, Ethan sounded exhausted. James yelled at me again about leaving dishes in the sink, made me scrub every dish in the house twice. When I asked Sarah about it, she sighed that martyred sigh. He's just being dramatic. James is trying to teach him responsibility. How long has he been treating you like this? I asked, though I dreaded the answer. Since Mom married him 4 years ago, Ethan said, voice barely audible. It started small, making me redo chores if they weren't perfect. Then it got worse. I remembered our fishing trip last summer, how Ethan seemed reluctant to go home, asking if we could stay another day. When I pressed, he shrugged and said he liked being on the lake. Now I saw it differently, the shadow that crossed his face when we talked about going back. The quiet way he spoke about school starting. The attic incident. I said, pieces clicking together. You mentioned sleeping in the garage. How many times more than I want to count, he said, shame in his eyes. Last winter, he locked me out for forgetting to clear the walkway. I slept in your truck when you visited for Christmas Eve. My truck. He'd slept in my truck on Christmas Eve while I was inside sipping hot chocolate, thinking we were having a perfect family holiday. The guilt hit like a physical blow. I looked toward the house, where warm light spilled from every window and faint laughter carried through the air. A perfect suburban holiday scene while my grandson nearly froze to death on the front steps. Your mother knows all this, Ethan nodded miserably. She says James is trying to make me a better person, that I need to stop being so sensitive and follow rules. The rage was building now, hot and focused, sharpening my vision. Ellen used to warn me about my temper, told me to count to 10 before acting. But Ellen wasn't here, and counting wouldn't help Ethan. I stood up, keeping him wrapped in my coat. Come on, we're going inside. Grandpa, no, he pleaded. If you make a scene, he'll just what? I turned to face him. Make you sleep outside in freezing weather, beat you, starve you. My voice hardened. Son, it can't get much worse than this. Ethan looked at the front door, fear in his eyes. You don't understand how he gets when someone challenges him. But I was already walking toward the house, Ethan trailing reluctantly behind. The front door looked solid, expensive, a symbol of James's pride in his perfect suburban fortress. I didn't bother knocking. My boot hit the door beside the lock with all the force I could muster. At 69, decades of factory work had left me stronger than most men half my age. The wood splintered with a crack that echoed through the neighborhood, the door slamming open so hard it bounced off the wall. Warm air rushed out, carrying the smell of roasted turkey and the sound of shocked silence. I stepped into the entryway, Ethan close behind, and took in a scene that stopped me cold. The dining room table was set like a magazine spread white tablecloth, flickering candles, crystal glasses catching the light. James sat at the head, carving knife in hand, wearing a pressed button-down shirt. Sarah sat beside him in a new blue dress, her hair perfectly styled. Their younger daughter, Lily, maybe 11, sat across from them, a forkful of mashed potatoes frozen halfway to her mouth. They were all paused mid-motion, like a holiday scene on a greeting card, The contrast hit like a physical blow. Here they sat, warm and comfortable, enjoying their feast, while Ethan had shivered outside for over 5 hours. The turkey looked golden, perfect, probably a replacement for the one Ethan had supposedly ruined. Everything was pristine, peaceful, exactly what a family Thanksgiving should be, except for the boy left to freeze. "Have you completely lost your minds?" My voice boomed through the room, and Lily's fork clattered to the table. Sarah's face went white as paper, her serving spoon hitting the table, splattering cranberry sauce across the cloth. "Dad," her voice squeaked, "what are you doing here while you're feasting like royalty?" That boy was freezing outside. I pointed at Ethan, still shivering in my coat despite the warm air. 5 hours. Sarah. 5 hours in weather that could have killed him. James set down his carving knife and rose, towering over me, probably outweighing me by 60 pounds. I'd been in fights in my younger days, and size didn't matter when you were angry enough. "Who gave you permission to enter my house?" His voice was controlled, but dangerous. The tone of a man unused to being challenged. "This is private property, and you're trespassing." "Private property." I stepped forward to meet him. "You mean the property where you locked my grandson out to freeze while you ate dinner?" Lily started crying, confused and frightened by the shouting. Sarah reached to comfort her, but her eyes stayed on me, torn between her father and her husband. "This is a private family matter," James said, his voice rising. "You have no business. No business." Heat rose in my face. "That's my grandson you nearly killed with your private family matter." Ethan pressed closer behind me, trembling now from fear, not cold. This was likely the first time anyone had challenged James in his own home, and we all knew it could turn ugly. Holiday music played softly in the background, some cheerful tune about gratitude and togetherness. The irony would have been funny if I weren't so furious I could barely see straight. I pointed at Ethan, my finger steady despite the rage coursing through me. "Look at him. James. Really look at what you've done." James crossed his arms, lifting his chin, every inch a man convinced he was justified. "The boy ruined our holiday. He needed to learn a lesson about responsibility and consequences." A lesson I could barely believe it. "You nearly froze a boy to death over a slightly overcooked turkey. He's 19, not a boy," James said, his tone patronizing. "And this is my house with my rules. I'm teaching him discipline, something his mother obviously failed to do in his first 18 years. Sarah flinched but stayed silent, watching like she was at a tennis match where someone might die. Discipline. I stepped closer, close enough to see the grease on James's plate, the wine stain on his lips. "That's called child abuse, and you're lucky I don't call the police right now." "Child abuse," James laughed, a cold sound that made my skin crawl. He forgot to reset a timer and ruined a $30 turkey. I sent him outside to think about his actions. "That's not abuse. That's parenting." "For 5 hours in 10-degree weather," I said. "He's being dramatic." "As always," James said, waving a hand like shooing a fly. "Look at him. He's fine. A little cold never hurt anyone." I looked at Ethan, still wrapped in my coat, lips blue, body shaking. Fine, this man thought hypothermia was fine. "Dad, please." Sarah finally spoke, her voice shaky. "Don't ruin our holiday. We can discuss this later as a family." "Ruin your holiday?" I turned to my daughter. "Your son was freezing while you ate dinner, and you're worried about me ruining your holiday?" She looked down at her plate, unable to meet my eyes. James was he was trying to teach Ethan responsibility. Sometimes boys need firm guidance. Firm guidance. My voice cracked with disbelief. "Sarah, when you were 19 and dented my truck, did I lock you out in a blizzard when you failed your history test? Did I make you sleep in the shed? That's different," she whispered. "How? How is it different?" James stepped between us, his face red with anger. Because this is my house, and Ethan is not my biological son. I have every right to discipline him as I see fit. There it was, the truth laid bare. Ethan wasn't his blood, so he didn't matter, just an inconvenience to be controlled and punished. You have 20 seconds to apologize to my grandson, I said, my voice deadly quiet. 20 seconds to show some basic human decency. James's laugh was colder this time. I don't owe that boy anything. If he doesn't like my rules, he can find somewhere else to live. Lily was crying harder now, and Sarah made shushing noises, but I could barely hear them over the roaring in my ears. All I saw was James's smug face. All I thought about was Ethan sitting on those steps for 5 hours, believing he deserved it. Somewhere else to live, I said, stepping closer. Close enough to smell the wine on his breath. You're right about that. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my cell phone, my thumb hovering over the keypad, the movement deliberate so everyone in the room understood what I was considering. James's face changed, his smug confidence cracking slightly. Either you apologize to my grandson right now, I said, voice calm but deadly, or I call Child Protective Services and report this abuse. You wouldn't dare, James said, stepping closer, trying to use his size to intimidate me. But I'd faced bigger men in my day, and I wasn't backing down from someone who hurt my family. Try me, I said, starting to dial the first number. I've got plenty to tell them about leaving a 19-year-old outside in 10-degree weather for 5 hours. Ethan gripped my arm, trembling now from a different kind of fear, the terror of someone who'd learned that standing up only made things worse. Dad, please, Sarah said, stepping between us, hands raised like she was stopping a bar fight. Don't destroy our family over this. I'm not destroying anything, I said. Eyes locked on James. He did that when he decided to abuse my grandson. Abuse. James's laugh was harsh, bitter. I was teaching him responsibility, something his weak mother never bothered to do. Sarah flinched like he'd slapped her. But she didn't defend herself, just stood there, taking it as she always did. Get out of my house, old man, James continued, his voice rising. You have no authority here. Ethan is my responsibility now. Your responsibility. I looked around the perfect dining room, the crystal glasses, fine china, holiday centerpiece, then back at Ethan's bruised face. Is this how you handle responsibility? Locking children outside to freeze. Lily was crying harder, confused and scared by the shouting. Sarah moved to comfort her but kept glancing between me and James, like she was watching a deadly match. He's not a child. He's 19, James said, straightening his shoulders. And in my house, adults who can't follow simple instructions face adult consequences. Adult consequences for forgetting a timer, I said. Adult consequences for being careless and destructive, for ruining our holiday and embarrassing our family in front of guests. James gestured toward empty chairs where other family members had clearly been sitting before I arrived. It hit me they'd had guests eating and socializing while Ethan froze outside, and none of them had questioned it. Grandpa, let's just go, Ethan whispered behind me. Please, I don't want to cause more problems. The defeat in his voice broke something inside me. This smart, kind young man had been beaten down so thoroughly he thought he was the problem for wanting basic human decency. You're not causing problems, son, I said loud enough for everyone to hear. You never were. I turned back to James, my decision crystallizing like ice in my veins. You have 20 seconds to apologize to my grandson for what you did today. I'm not apologizing for anything, James said, arms crossed, chin raised in defiance. And I'm certainly not taking orders from some bitter old man who can't accept that his precious grandson needed discipline. Then we're done here, I said, closing my phone and pocketing it. Ethan, go get your things. You're coming home with me. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Lily stopped crying for a moment. "You can't just take him," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. "Watch me." I placed my hand firmly on Ethan's shoulder, guiding him away from the dining room toward the stairs. "Go pack whatever you need. We're leaving." "Dad, you can't do this," Sarah said, following us, her voice rising with panic. "You can't just walk into our house and take my son." "I can. And I am," I said, staying between Ethan and the rest of the family. "Unless you'd prefer I call the authorities and let them sort it out." Ethan led the way up the narrow staircase to the second floor, his steps quick and uncertain. I heard James's heavy footsteps on the hardwood behind us, but I didn't turn around. "This is kidnapping," James called out. "I'll have you arrested for kidnapping." Good luck explaining to the police why my grandson was sitting outside in 10-degree weather for 5 hours, I shot back. "At the top of the stairs!" Ethan led me down a short hallway to a small room at the back of the house. It was barely big enough for a twin bed and a small dresser, with no heat vent and a single north-facing window letting in the coldest air. It looked more like a storage closet than a bedroom, clearly the worst room in the house. "This is where you sleep?" I asked, taking in the sparse furnishings and bare walls. Ethan nodded, pulling clothes from the dresser and stuffing them into a duffel bag. "James says the basement room is for guests, and the other upstairs room is for Lily." I noticed he didn't say our sister, just Lily. Even in his own home, he was an outsider. "Take everything that matters to you," I said, standing guard at the doorway while he packed. "We're not coming back for anything." "Ethan, think about what you're doing," Sarah said, appearing in the doorway, her face streaked with tears. "This is your home, your family." "Some family," Ethan muttered, folding a Virginia Tech sweatshirt into his bag. "Real families don't lock each other outside to freeze." "James was just trying to teach you responsibility," Sarah said. By giving me hypothermia, Ethan looked up at his mother, and I saw 4 years of hurt and disappointment in his eyes. "Mom, he made me sleep in the garage last week because I left a glass in the sink." "A glass," I said. "That's not normal." Sarah's face crumpled. He has high standards. He wants you to be better." "He wants me gone," Ethan said quietly, zipping up his bag. "And you know it." We made our way back downstairs, James waiting at the bottom like a bouncer. "You leave my house, boy, and you don't come back ever," he said. "Fine by me," Ethan replied, and I heard real strength in his voice for the first time that day. The front door still hung open from when I'd kicked it in, cold air pouring into the house, making the holiday decorations flutter like dying leaves. I could see my truck in the driveway, engine still running, exhaust visible in the frigid air. "Ethan," Sarah called as we reached the door, "please don't do this. I love you." He stopped, turned back to look at his mother one last time. "If you loved me, Mom, you wouldn't have let this happen." We walked to my truck in silence, our breath visible in the freezing air. I threw his bag in the bed and helped him into the passenger seat, then walked around to the driver's side, through the front window of the house. I saw the family still standing in the entryway, Sarah crying, James red-faced with rage, Lily peeking around the corner. "You ready?" I asked, putting the truck in reverse. "I've been ready for 4 years, Ethan said, pulling my coat tighter around his shoulders. I backed out of the driveway and onto the street, passing other decorated houses where normal families were likely finishing their Thanksgiving dinners in peace. The radio played classic rock. The heater hummed perfectly. And for the first time since I'd arrived, Ethan looked like he could finally breathe. "Thank you, Grandpa," he said quietly as we turned onto the main road toward the highway. "I can't believe you came for me. I should have come sooner," I said, meaning every word. "I should have seen what was happening." "I tried to tell you," he said, "but I didn't know how." We drove in comfortable silence for a few minutes. the familiar weight of family responsibility settling around my shoulders like Ellen's favorite quilt. This boy needed protection, a safe place to heal and grow into the man he was meant to become. "Tell me about college," I said as we merged onto Interstate 95 North. "What are you studying engineering?" he said, his voice growing stronger. "Civil engineering, like you used to do at the factory. Like grandfather, like grandson," I said, smiling, thinking of how proud Ellen would have been. "We'll figure out the tuition. Don't worry about that, Grandpa. I don't want to be a burden." "Son, you're not a burden. You're family, and family takes care of each other." My driveway looked smaller than usual, with both trucks parked side by side, but the house itself seemed to glow with welcome as we approached. I'd left the porch light on out of habit, and now it served as a small beacon cutting through the winter darkness. "Home, sweet home," I said, helping Ethan carry his bag to the front door. The key turned easily in the lock, and warm air rushed out to greet us as we stepped inside. The house smelled of coffee and the lingering scent of Ellen's rose sachets. It wasn't much a modest ranch with worn furniture and carpet that had seen better days, but it was paid for, and it was ours. "You remember where the guest room is?" I asked, flipping on lights as we moved through the living room. "Yeah, down the hall next to your room," Ethan said, looking around with obvious relief. "It's so warm in here." "Thermostat's set to 70 year-round," I said. "Your grandmother always said life was too short to be cold in your own house." I showed him to the guest room and helped him get settled. The room was simple but comfortable, a double bed with one of Ellen's quilts, a dresser, and a reading chair by the window. Photos of family gatherings lined the walls, including several of Ethan at various ages. This had always been his room when he visited, and seeing him here now felt right in a way nothing had since Ellen passed. "I'll get some dinner started," I said. "Nothing fancy, chicken in the freezer and some vegetables that need using up." "Can I help?" he asked, and I could see how desperately he wanted to be useful, to earn his keep. "Sure, but you don't have to," I said. "This is your home now, not a job." We worked together in the kitchen, and gradually the day's tension began to leave Ethan's shoulders. I thawed the chicken in the microwave while he washed vegetables, and we moved around each other with the easy rhythm of family members who'd cooked together before. "Tell me more about what's been happening," I said as I seasoned the chicken. "Start from the beginning, when your mother married James." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, clearly deciding how much to share. "It started small," he said. "Little comments about how I loaded the dishwasher wrong or left my shoes in the wrong place. Then it got bigger. How much bigger he controls everything when I eat. What I eat. When I can shower. When I can use the phone." His voice grew smaller. He made Mom choose between him and me, and she chose him. I had to stop seasoning the chicken and grip the counter. "What do you mean she chose him last Christmas, when you visited? Remember how I was quiet during dinner? James had told me I wasn't allowed to speak unless someone asked me a direct question. Mom didn't say anything to stop him." The memory hit like a punch. I'd thought Ethan was just being a moody teenager, even joked about it with Ellen later, saying kids these days didn't know how to make conversation. "Why doesn't your mother stand up to him?" I asked. "She's scared," Ethan said, chopping carrots with mechanical precision. "She told me once that if she leaves him, she'll lose the house and have to move back to that apartment complex where we used to live. She can't afford to take care of us on her own." I slid the chicken into the oven and started a fire in the living room fireplace. The familiar ritual of wadding newspaper and stacking kindling calmed my racing thoughts. "Come sit with me," I said when the fire was crackling steadily. "Tell me about the good things, school, friends." We settled into the comfortable chairs by the fire, and for the first time all day, Ethan smiled. I made Dean's List last semester. And I've got this friend, Ryan, who's teaching me to play guitar. Your grandmother always wanted to learn guitar, I said, pointing to a framed photo on the mantel of Ellen at 20, laughing and holding an acoustic guitar. She said music was the language of the soul. I remember her saying that, Ethan said, studying the photo. I miss her. Me too, son. Me too. We talked until the chicken was done, sharing memories of Ellen and making plans for Ethan's spring semester. The house felt alive again with conversation and laughter, the way it used to when Ellen filled the quiet spaces. As we sat down to eat our simple but satisfying meal, I looked across the table at my grandson, really looked at him, looked. The fear was gone from his eyes, replaced by something I hadn't seen in years, hope. We'll call the college tomorrow, I said, cutting into my chicken. Make sure your financial aid is sorted, and we'll look into a part-time job if you want one. Grandpa, you don't have to do all this for me, he said. Yes, I do, I said, meeting his eyes. That's what family's for. The phone rang just as we finished dessert leftover pie I'd found in the freezer. The sound cut through our peaceful evening like a knife, and Ethan tensed immediately. I looked at the caller ID and felt my jaw clench, Sarah. The peaceful crackling of the fireplace was shattered by 3 sharp knocks on the front door, not the gentle tap of a neighbor or the hesitant knock of someone unsure, but the authoritative pounding of someone expecting immediate compliance. Ethan nearly dropped his coffee mug. Grandpa, stay behind me, I said, setting down my cup and moving toward the door. The knocking came again, more insistent, accompanied by voices on my front porch. I flipped on the porch light and looked through the peephole. 2 uniformed police officers stood on my doorstep, and behind them, like predators waiting for their moment, were James and Sarah. Mr. Carter, the lead officer called. Police, we need to speak with you. I took a deep breath and opened the door, keeping my body positioned to block their view of Ethan. What can I do for you? Officers James stepped forward, pointing an accusatory finger. Officer, this man kidnapped my stepson. He broke into our house and took the boy without permission. The lead officer, a middle-aged man with weary eyes, held up a hand to quiet James. Sir, we need to sort out this situation. Mr. Carter, is there a young man named Ethan Reed on these premises? Yes, I said simply. My grandson is here. He kidnapped him. James's voice rose dramatically. Broke down our door like a criminal and dragged the boy away from his family. Is the young man here voluntarily? The second officer asked, pulling out a notepad. Before I could answer, Ethan appeared beside me, still wrapped in the blanket from the couch. His voice was quiet but clear. I want to stay with my grandpa. James's face flushed red. See, he's been filling the boy's head with lies, turning him against his own family. What lies? I stepped forward slightly. The truth about how you left him outside in 10-degree weather for 5 hours. The truth about how you've been abusing him for 4 years. Abuse, James laughed. But it sounded forced. I was teaching him responsibility. The boy ruined our entire Thanksgiving dinner and needed to learn there are consequences for his actions. The first officer looked between us with the weary expression of someone who'd broken up too many family disputes. Mr. Carter, we're going to need everyone to come inside so we can discuss this properly. I stepped back reluctantly, allowing the officers to enter my living room. James followed immediately, Sarah trailing behind, her eyes fixed on the floor. She looked smaller, diminished, like a woman who'd realized the true cost of her choices. Now then, the officer said, taking out his notepad. Let's start from the beginning. Mr. Reed, you claim this man kidnapped your stepson. Absolutely, James said, straightening his shoulders, putting on what I recognized as his reasonable authority figure performance. I came home from work to find my front door broken and Ethan gone. When I called around, Neighbors said they saw an older man forcing the boy into a truck. Forcing, I couldn't keep the disbelief out of my voice. Officer, I rescued my grandson from child abuse. That's what he keeps saying, James said, shaking his head sadly. But the truth is, he's never approved of my marriage to his daughter. He's been looking for any excuse to cause trouble. The officer turned to Ethan, who stood close enough that I could feel him trembling. Son, did this man force you to come with him? No. Sir, Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. He saved me from freezing to death on the front porch. The second officer looked up from his notepad. Explain that. I accidentally burned the turkey this morning, Ethan said. James made me sit outside in the cold to think about my actions. I was out there for over 5 hours in 10-degree weather. He's exaggerating, James said quickly. It was maybe an hour, and he was dressed warmly. An hour I stared at him. Officer, I have witnesses. My grandson was sitting on that porch in a thin shirt and jeans when I arrived at 2:45. He'd been there since 10:30 in the morning. The first officer looked at James with new interest. Sir, is it true you made the young man sit outside as punishment briefly? Yes, James said, his confident facade beginning to crack. But he's making it sound worse than it was. Look, sometimes teenagers need firm discipline. In 10-degree weather for several hours, the officer asked. James's composure faltered slightly. His mother and I agreed that Mom didn't agree to anything. Ethan interrupted, his voice stronger. She just didn't stop you. All eyes turned to Sarah, who stood by the doorway like she was ready to bolt, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Ma'am, the officer prompted gently. What's your version of events? Sarah looked like a woman standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing her next words would decide whether she stepped back or fell. Her hands shook as she glanced between James's expectant face and Ethan's hopeful eyes. Mrs. Reed, the first officer said softly. We need to know what really happened today. James moved closer to his wife, his posture subtly intimidating, his eyes carrying a warning. Tell them, honey, he said. Tell them how your father has been poisoning Ethan against our family. The officer noticed it too. Sir, please step back and let your wife speak for herself. Sarah's voice came out as a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again. Ethan did burn the turkey this morning, and James was upset, very upset. And the officer prompted. He said Ethan needed to learn responsibility by sitting outside in the cold. Another glance at James, then quickly away. In 10-degree weather, she added, her voice trembling. How long was he outside? Ma'am, the officer asked. Since around 10:30, Sarah said, her voice shrinking, until my father arrived. Around 2:45. The officer did the math in his head. Over 4 hours in 10-degree weather. She's making it sound worse than it was. James interjected. He could have come inside any time if he'd apologized and shown some remorse. No, he couldn't, Sarah said suddenly, and everyone turned to stare at her. You locked the door. You told me not to let him in, no matter what. The silence that followed was deafening. James's face went white, then red, then back to white. Sarah, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. What are you doing? I'm telling the truth, she said, tears starting to form in her eyes. For once in 4 years. I'm telling the truth. The officer leaned forward slightly. Mrs. Reed, has this kind of punishment happened before? Yes, she said, the word rushing out like she'd been holding it back for years. He's made Ethan sleep in the garage, in the attic. He's locked him out of the house overnight. Her voice grew stronger with each confession. He controls when Ethan can eat, when he can shower, when he can speak at the dinner table. Sarah. Shut up, James snapped, his mask slipping completely. You have no idea what you're doing, You'll destroy everything we've built. What we've built. She turned on him with sudden fury. What have we built except fear and misery? Look at my son. Look what you've done to him. I watched Ethan's face transform as his mother finally stood up for him. 4 years of doubt and self-blame seemed to melt away as he realized someone else saw the truth of what he'd endured. The first officer stood and moved toward James. "Sir, I'm going to need you to turn around and put your hands behind your back." "This is ridiculous," James said, backing toward the door. "You're going to arrest me based on the word of a bitter old man and his delusional daughter based on the physical evidence and multiple corroborating testimonies about child endangerment," the officer said calmly, pulling out his handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent." As they read James his rights and led him toward the door, he turned back to Sarah, venom in his eyes. "You'll regret this betrayal. You'll lose everything, the house, the money, everything. You'll be nothing without me. I'd rather be nothing than watch you hurt my son," Sarah said. And for the first time in years, she sounded like the strong woman who'd raised Ethan on her own. The door closed behind the officers and their prisoner, leaving the three of us alone in my living room. Sarah collapsed into a chair and started crying, not the quiet, careful tears she'd shed before, but deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from years of buried pain. Ethan went to her immediately, kneeling beside her chair. "Mom, it's okay. It's over now. I'm so sorry," she whispered through her tears. "I should have protected you. I should have been stronger." "You were strong tonight," I said, settling back into my chair by the fireplace. "When it mattered most, you chose your son over your husband. That took real courage." The fire crackled peacefully, and for the first time in months, my house felt like a true home again, not just because my family was safe, but because the truth had finally been spoken, and justice was being served. Ethan looked up at me from where he knelt beside his mother's chair. "What happens now?" "Grandpa, now we heal," I said simply. "We take our time, and we heal." 5 months later, the morning sun streamed through my kitchen window as Sarah flipped pancakes on the griddle, and Ethan sat at the table, reviewing his acceptance letter from Virginia Tech's engineering program. "Full scholarship," he said for the 10th time that week, still not quite believing it. "They're actually paying me to go to school." "That's what happens when you're brilliant and work hard," Sarah said, sliding a stack of pancakes onto his plate. She looked different now, stronger, more confident. The part-time job at the local bookstore had given her an independence she'd never had before, and the divorce settlement provided enough money for her to start over. "Your grandmother would have been so proud," I said, settling into my chair with my coffee. The kitchen felt alive in a way it hadn't since Ellen died, filled with conversation, laughter, and the comfortable chaos of a real family. Sarah had moved in permanently after James's conviction. The guest room had become her space, and we'd converted the basement into a proper bedroom for Ethan, not a punishment cell like at James's house, but a comfortable retreat with good heating and windows that actually opened. "Dad, are you sure you don't mind us staying here indefinitely?" Sarah asked, joining us at the table. "I know you're used to your independence. Independence is overrated." I said, meaning every word. "Family is what matters. Besides, who else is going to make sure Ethan doesn't burn down the kitchen when he tries to cook?" "That was one time," Ethan protested, laughing, and the fire was very small. The phone rang, and Sarah answered. "Carter Residence." "Oh, hi. Ryan." "Yes, he's here. Guitar practice at 3, sure. I'll tell him." She hung up and turned to us. "Your friend Ryan wants to know if you're still planning to practice for the talent show." "Talent show?" I raised an eyebrow. Ethan grinned, looking more like the confident young man he was meant to be. "It's nothing big. Ryan and I are doing an acoustic set. A couple of classic rock songs you'd probably recognize. I'll be in the front row, I promised. After breakfast, I found Sarah in the living room, arranging new family photos on the mantel alongside pictures of Ellen. There was one from Ethan's high school graduation, which we'd missed because of the James situation, one from our fishing trip last month, and one from Christmas morning, our first real family Christmas in years. Any word from James, I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. His lawyer called yesterday. Sarah said, the anger management therapy is going well, apparently, but he lost his job at the hardware store. He's moving back to Baltimore to live with his sister. Good, I said. The farther away, the better. I feel sorry for him sometimes, she admitted. But then I remember what he did to Ethan, and the feeling passes quickly. That afternoon, while Ethan was at guitar practice, Sarah and I worked in the garden, preparing the soil for Ellen's vegetable patch. Spring was coming early this year, and there was something hopeful about planting seeds and planning for growth. Dad, Sarah said, pulling weeds with focused determination, I need to thank you again for what you did. If you hadn't come that day, you don't need to thank me, I said, turning over a stubborn clump of earth. I was just doing what any grandfather would do. No, you weren't, she said. You risked everything to save him. You could have been arrested, charged with kidnapping. But I wasn't. I said, truth has a way of winning out in the end. She smiled, wiping dirt from her hands. Ellen used to say that. She was a smart woman. I said, smarter than me, anyway. That evening, we settled into our routine dinner together, followed by a game show or movie on TV. It wasn't exciting or glamorous, but it was exactly what we needed, predictable. Peaceful, safe. Ethan had his guitar out, quietly practicing in the corner while Sarah worked on a crossword puzzle, and I read the newspaper. Normal family activities that had seemed impossible just a few months ago. Grandpa, Ethan said during a commercial break, I've been thinking about changing my major, from engineering to what social work. Maybe counseling, he said, setting down his guitar and looking at me seriously. I want to help other kids who are going through what I went through. I felt a surge of pride so strong it nearly took my breath away. This young man, who had every right to be bitter and angry, wanted to use his experience to help others. That's a fine goal, I said. Your grandmother always said the best way to heal from pain is to help others avoid it. Did she really say that, he asked. She did, I said, along with about 1,000 other pieces of wisdom I should have listened to more carefully. As the evening wore on and Sarah dozed in her chair, Ethan and I stepped out onto the back porch to look at the stars. The night was clear and cold, but nothing like that terrible Thanksgiving when I'd found him freezing on James's doorstep. Ready for fishing season to open, I asked. Can't wait, he said. Think we'll catch anything bigger than last year with your luck? Probably a whale. We stood in comfortable silence. 2 generations of Carter men who'd found their way back to each other through crisis and truth. In a few months, Ethan would head off to college, and eventually he'd build his own life and family. But the foundation was solid now, built on honesty, protection, and the kind of love that asks for nothing in return. Grandpa, Ethan said as we headed back inside, thank you for coming to get me. Thank you for being worth saving, I said. The house was warm and bright as we locked up for the night. 3 people who'd learned that family isn't just about blood. It's about showing up when it matters most, telling the truth even when it's hard, and protecting the people you love, no matter the cost. Ellen would have been proud of all of us. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.